The mirror had not been kind to Meera in years, yet tonight she faced it with unusual calm. The small bulb above her dressing table flickered, as if uncertain whether to stay or die, much like her career. Her makeup lay scattered before her, a battlefield of powders and brushes, sequins and false lashes, all weapons of illusion she had wielded for nearly 3 decades. She applied her eyeliner with a slow, deliberate hand. It trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from age. Her reflection looked back with the tired grace of someone who had lived 1,000 lives beneath a single name. Behind the glitter, the rouge, the practiced smile, there was a woman who had danced through humiliation, heartbreak, and hunger, yet somehow remained standing. Outside her small dressing room, the sound of the bar's band warming up seeped through the thin walls, a lazy jazz tune that tried to sound glamorous but carried an undertone of sadness. The smell of cheap perfume mingled with whiskey and sweat, wrapping the place in a scent that was neither pleasant nor offensive, merely familiar. This was the Sapphire Room, one of the city's oldest dance bars, a relic of an era that refused to fade even as the world outside grew colder and more moralistic. The city had changed, skyscrapers rose where old cinemas once stood, and neon lights now sold digital fantasies instead of real ones. But inside these 4 dim walls, time moved more slowly. The women here had learned to survive on tips, charm, and endurance. Tonight was Meera's final show. It wasn't officially announced, and the management didn't care for farewells, but the regulars knew. Her loyal customers, mostly middle-aged men who had watched her transform from the new girl with the golden anklets to Madame Meera, had left whispers of gifts, flowers, and promises of one last dance. She smiled at the thought. Promises were the cheapest currency here. Her hand brushed against a folded photograph taped to the edge of her mirror. It showed 5 young women, herself and 4 others, in matching glittering costumes, smiling brightly with unwrinkled faces and unbroken spirits. The picture was taken the night they had performed for a film star's private party, years ago. They'd believed then that the world had noticed them, that maybe they'd be discovered, offered a better life. But fame had never called. Poverty did, every morning. Meera's gaze softened. Of the 5 women, only she remained in the business. Nisha had married a customer who promised to take her to Dubai. No one heard from her again. Kamla had died of an infection when she couldn't afford treatment. Parveen left to start a tailoring shop after her knees gave out. And Rupa had vanished one rainy night, leaving behind her costume, her anklets, and rumors that she'd been taken by someone powerful who didn't want her found. The reflection blurred as Meera's eyes welled up, though she blinked the tears away before they could fall. In this world, tears were a luxury. They demanded softness, and softness was punished. A soft knock came at the door. "Didi?" It was Tara, the youngest dancer in the troupe, barely 20, her face still full of belief. She peeked in, her silver costume shimmering like a fallen moon. "They're calling for you. The house is full tonight." Meera turned, smiling faintly. "Of course it is. Everyone loves a finale." Tara stepped closer, her tone hesitant. "Is it true, Didi? You're really leaving?" Meera reached out, adjusting a loose pin in Tara's hair. "Every dancer leaves one day, Beta. The body decides before the heart does." "But you could teach," Tara protested softly. "The new girls, they listen to you. They need you." Meera smiled at that, a slow, wistful smile. "Maybe. But first, I need to learn what life feels like without music." When Tara left, Meera took one last look around her dressing room. The cracked mirror, the faded posters, the little silver idols on the shelf, Lakshmi and Saraswati, goddesses of wealth and art, seemed to mock the paradox of her existence. For years, she had danced for men who never saw her as an artist, only as an escape. Yet in her heart, she had always believed dance was more than survival. It was language, memory, defiance. She walked through the narrow hallway toward the stage. The chatter of the crowd rose like static, merging with the band's opening notes. The stage lights flickered on, blinding for a second, and then softened into gold. As she stepped out, applause greeted her, warm, familiar, tinged with nostalgia. Men in wrinkled shirts, their faces half hidden in smoke, raised their glasses to her. Some smiled with affection, others with the pity reserved for things that once glittered brighter. She bowed slightly, her anklets chiming like old secrets. The music began, a slow classical fusion piece, chosen by Meera herself. It was the same melody she'd first danced to when she arrived at Sapphire at 18. The rhythm entered her bones like an old friend. Her body moved, slower now, but with precision and grace honed by decades of repetition. Every turn, every flick of her wrist, every trembling step carried a memory of laughter, jealousy, friendship, betrayal. She could see their faces in the crowd of her mind. Rupa, with her fearless laughter, Kamla, who always dreamed of becoming a film choreographer, Parveen, whose gentle nature couldn't survive the cruelty of men, and Nisha, who had sworn she'd never end up like the rest of them. The dance became a conversation with ghosts. She danced for the nights they had gone hungry, for the love that never stayed, for the promises that tasted of ash, for the moments of joy that came in stolen sips between survival and surrender. When the final note faded, Meera stood still in the golden haze, chest rising and falling, eyes shimmering. The room erupted into applause, whistles, and cheers, but she heard none of it clearly. She felt only silence, heavy and holy. The stage manager gestured for her to take a bow. She did, once, deeply, with humility. As she turned to leave, a single rose landed on the stage at her feet. Meera paused, looking down. It was from someone in the front row, an elderly man in a gray suit, his face vaguely familiar. Perhaps he had been one of her earliest patrons, or perhaps not. They all blurred together after so many years. She bent down, picked up the rose, and held it against her heart. Behind her, the lights dimmed. Ahead, the hallway to her dressing room glowed faintly, waiting. She knew that when she crossed it tonight, she would not return. In the mirror, waiting for her, she would remove her makeup one last time, and with it, erase the mask of Meera the dancer. What remained would be only the woman, older, weathered, uncelebrated, yet free, for the first time, from the need to perform. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming softly on the old tin roof. It sounded almost like applause. The rain was steady by the time Meera stepped outside the Sapphire room. It wasn't the dramatic monsoon kind, no thunder, no lightning, just a quiet drizzle that softened the harshness of the streetlights. The city's chaos had a muffled sound tonight, like the world itself had turned the volume down for her exit. She wrapped her old shawl tightly around her shoulders, the silk costume hidden beneath her long coat. The shawl had once been deep maroon, now it was a faded shade between memory and surrender. As she began her walk toward the bus stop, the puddles mirrored fragments of her life, flashes of neon, broken reflections of herself, and faces that only existed now in recollection. The road curved past a row of closed shops, cheap jewelry stores, imitation sari boutiques, and a pawn stall that never slept. A group of younger dancers giggled under an umbrella across the street, their laughter light and careless. They didn't notice her. Or maybe they did, and pretended not to, as if her presence was a ghost of their possible future. Meera understood. She had done the same once. She walked on. The rhythm of her anklets, still tied beneath her coat, echoed faintly with each step. It was a sound she had loved once, the delicate chime that made her feel powerful. Now it sounded like time running out. When she reached the bus shelter, she sat on the cold metal bench and closed her eyes. The city was vast, but memory made it small. She thought back to the beginning, the small town by the river where her story had started, years before the lights, before the shame, before the applause. She had been 17 then, and desperate. Her father, once a schoolteacher, had fallen ill. Tuberculosis, they said. Her mother worked odd jobs, but food was scarce, and debt was a constant shadow. Meera had been a dancer even then, not a professional, but a natural. At village weddings, she'd join the festive circles, moving with grace and laughter that made everyone watch. She had no idea then that her gift would one day be her curse, her profession, and her salvation all at once. When the neighbor's cousin, a man from the city, came visiting, he told her mother there was work for girls who could move well in Mumbai. Not bad work, he said, just dance. Good money, good food, proper stage. Her mother hesitated, but hunger doesn't listen to doubt. Within a week, Meera was on a crowded train, her small bag packed with 2 saris, a packet of biscuits, and a dream her mother had stitched into the lining of her blouse makiki. Something of yourself, child. The city was overwhelming. The first dance bar she saw looked nothing like she had imagined. It was darker, smaller, filled with smoke and noise. The manager, a sharp-faced woman named Rehana, looked her up and down like inspecting fruit at a market. "You have a face people will pay for," she had said, "but you'll have to learn to sell it gently." That was her first lesson, not in dance, but in survival. In the weeks that followed, Rehana taught her everything. How to hold eye contact just long enough to make a man believe he mattered. How to move without losing control. How to smile without showing exhaustion. "The trick," Rehana said, "is to make them think they're saving you, when in truth, you're saving yourself." The money was small at first, coins thrown on the stage, drinks bought by strangers, tips slipped into trembling palms. But it was more than she'd ever had. Enough to send home, enough to keep her family alive. She told herself she was lucky. She told herself this was temporary. Then, one night, she met Rupa. Rupa was everything Meera wasn't. Bold, loud, radiant. She had a laugh that shook the bar's walls and a habit of calling every customer John, whether she liked them or not. She was the kind of woman the others envied and feared. Within weeks, Rupa took Meera under her wing. "Rule number 1, Rupa had said, fixing her lipstick in the mirror. "You dance for the music, not for the men. If they like it, good. If they don't, they can drown in their whiskey." She had become Meera's friend, sister, and guardian all at once. Together, they learned how to navigate the chaos, to read the mood of a room, to protect each other from customers who mistook kindness for invitation, and to laugh even when their hearts were breaking. But the nights took their toll. There were days when Meera would sit behind the bar's back door, her feet blistered, staring at the sunrise and wondering if she would ever be anything else. Then she'd remember her family's letters, her mother's trembling handwriting telling her that the medicine had worked, that her father was getting better, that her little brother was in school. It was enough. It had to be. Back in the present, Meera opened her eyes as a bus rumbled into view, splashing rainwater onto the street. She didn't stand. Instead, she watched it come and go, feeling strangely detached, as if she was already halfway between 2 worlds. Across the road, a billboard advertised a new film. A glamorous actress in a sequined dress, frozen mid-dance under golden lights. The tagline read, "Her courage lit the world." Meera smiled faintly. The irony wasn't lost on her. In her time, society had called women like her immoral, vulgar, unworthy of respect, yet their art, their rhythm, their allure had been stolen, repackaged, and celebrated by those who never tasted their pain. The dance bars had been raided, banned, reopened, and restricted countless times. Politicians called them dens of corruption. Journalists called them controversial entertainment zones. Yet no one asked why women kept coming back to dance there. No one wanted to hear that for many, it wasn't vice, it was the only job available when the world offered none. Meera had seen girls arrive with hope and leave in silence. Some escaped, some vanished. Others, like her, stayed, not out of love for the life, but because it was the one stage where they still had agency, however fragile. Her mind wandered again to Rupa. The last night they saw each other. The argument, the rain, the scream that Meera still heard in her sleep. The sound of another bus approaching brought her back. This time, she stood and stepped aboard. The conductor glanced at her costume, his eyes flicking briefly with recognition, not judgment, just curiosity. She paid her fare, took a window seat, and leaned her forehead against the glass. Outside, the city passed by, glittering hotels, dark alleys, late-night tea stalls, and a crowd of lives she would never know. But every corner carried a memory, a fragment of her story scattered like fallen petals. She thought of the word retirement. It sounded absurd, almost comic. How does one retire from surviving? She smiled to herself. Maybe tomorrow she would visit the temple she hadn't entered in years. Maybe she'd finally write to her brother, tell him who she had become. Or maybe she'd just walk by the sea and let the tide carry away what remained of Meera, the dancer. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. But deep down, she knew, before she could truly move on, she had to make peace with the past. And that meant facing what happened the night Rupa disappeared. The rain outside thickened, tapping rhythmically against the window pane. The city blurred into streaks of gold and gray. Meera closed her eyes again, and memory, uninvited but relentless, began to dance. The next morning arrived as if the night had left no trace, but Meera knew better. She woke before dawn, as she always did, her body conditioned by years of rehearsals, late nights, and early realities. Her small apartment, a single-room space on the 4th floor of an old building, was still. The fan above her turned lazily, its blades clicking every few seconds like a clock marking time too slowly. She made herself tea and sat by the window. Below, the street was just beginning to stir, newspaper boys on bicycles, stray dogs chasing the scent of morning food stalls, and women sweeping their doorsteps as if erasing yesterday's dust. The steam from her tea fogged the glass, and for a moment she traced a small circle with her finger, the outline of a bangle. Habit, nostalgia. Her mind drifted back to the years that had hardened her, the middle of her career, when the glamour had faded, but she was still too young to quit. When the dance bars were at their most crowded, when every night felt like a fever dream wrapped in lights and lies. It was during those years that Rupa vanished. They had been performing together for almost 5 years by then. Meera, Rupa, Parveen, Kamla, and Nisha, the same group from the old photograph still taped to Meera's mirror. They were more than colleagues, they were family. Each had a different reason for being there, but they shared the same unspoken truth. The stage was the only place where they were visible. Outside those walls, they were ghosts. Rupa was the brightest among them. Her movements were magnetic, her confidence unmatched. Men fought for her attention, threw wads of cash at her feet, and sent her gifts. But she was clever. She never allowed anyone to own her. That defiance made her admired by some and despised by others. One night, a new patron arrived, a man named Mr. Deshmukh, wealthy, political. The kind of man everyone pretended not to recognize, but everyone feared to displease. He watched Rupa dance from his private booth, eyes cold and calculating. When the music ended, he sent his man with an envelope and a message. "He wants to see you." Rupa refused. That was the beginning of the end. In their world, refusal was rebellion, and rebellion always had a cost. The next few nights, strange things began to happen. Rupa's shifts were reduced. Her tips went missing. One evening she found her costume slashed. Rihanna, the bar manager, shrugged helplessly. "You should have been polite, Rupa. Some men don't like no for an answer." Meera remembered the argument that followed in the dressing room, Rupa pacing, furious. "I'm not a toy they can buy," she had shouted. "If I wanted to sell myself, I'd do it on my terms, not theirs." Her voice had carried down the hallway. Some girls listened in silence. Others turned away, afraid. Meera had tried to calm her, but Rupa's fire burned too bright. "You don't understand, Meera," she said, eyes wet with rage. "You think loyalty will save you. It won't. They'll use you until you break. Then they'll replace you with someone younger, hungrier, cheaper." She wasn't wrong. 2 nights later, Rupa was gone. No one saw her leave. Her locker was empty, her anklets missing. Some said she'd finally accepted the rich man's offer. Others whispered she'd been taken against her will. The truth dissolved in rumor like sugar in tea. sweet, bitter, impossible to separate. Meera tried to ask questions, but the bar had turned cold. Rihanna warned her to let it go. "You have bills to pay, Meera. Don't go chasing ghosts. The city eats girls like her for breakfast." But Meera couldn't let it rest. She went to the police once, just once, and never again. The officer had smirked when she introduced herself as a dancer from the Sapphire Room. "Those girls disappear every week," he said casually. "Maybe she found a better customer. Why do you care?" Why did she care? Because Rupa had been her friend, her sister in the storm, the one who'd taught her to dance for herself, not for the men. And now, she was gone, a story erased before it could be told. That night, Meera danced on stage as if possessed. Every movement was sharper, angrier. The rhythm became a rebellion, her eyes searching the crowd as though Rupa might walk in at any moment. When the lights dimmed, she ran to the backstage hallway and broke down, the first and only time she ever cried in public. Parveen had held her, whispering, "Forget her, Meera. She's at peace now, wherever she is. Don't bring trouble on yourself." But the guilt stayed. For years, Meera carried Rupa's absence like a hidden wound. Every time she danced, she imagined Rupa's laughter echoing somewhere just behind her, a reminder that silence was not safety, and survival always demanded a price. Back in the present, Meera set her cup down, her tea cold and untouched. The city outside had come alive now, horns and voices filling the morning. She looked around her room. The costumes hung neatly in a corner, reds, blues, golds fading like sunset colors. Her anklets lay coiled beside her bed. Her eyes fell again on the old photograph she had taken from the bar before leaving last night. She studied it closely now, 5 smiling faces frozen in time, unaware of what awaited them. "I'm the only one left," she whispered. It wasn't pride or sorrow, just truth. The years had taken everyone else, but what haunted her wasn't survival, it was purpose. What had it all meant? Was dance simply a means to earn, or had it been something more, an act of endurance, of rebellion, of identity? For most of her life, society had reduced her to one word: bar dancer. A label that erased everything else: her hunger, her art, her compassion, her humanity. She had learned to live under that weight, to smile while being judged by those who consumed her performance yet denied her existence. But now, standing at the edge of her own story, she realized something. They could label her, silence her, even forget her, but they could not erase what she had created. Every movement she had made, every step that had once been called sinful, had in truth been a language, the only one she'd been allowed to speak. Her dance had been her testimony, her defiance, her art. She had turned exploitation into expression, poverty into poetry, survival into performance, and in that, she had found something no one could take: dignity. Later that afternoon, she decided to visit Rupa's old neighborhood, a part of the city she hadn't walked through in decades. She took the same route they once did together after rehearsals, through narrow lanes lined with tailor shops, chai stalls, and the sound of radio songs echoing from open windows. The lane smelled of wet earth and fried snacks, familiar and distant at once. She stopped at a corner stall where an old man was selling bangles. "You still here, Chacha?" she asked softly. He squinted, then his face lit up. "Are Meera Betty. I thought you'd left the city long ago." She smiled. "Almost did. How's business?" "Business?" he chuckled. "The young ones want glass bangles only for Instagram now. No one buys them for weddings like before. The world's changing too fast." She nodded, buying a set of red bangles anyway. The color of beginnings, though hers were ending. "Do you remember Rupa?" she asked suddenly. The man paused, his smile fading. "Rupa? Yes, the loud one. Beautiful girl. She used to buy green bangles from me, said they brought her luck. Then one day she never came back." He sighed. "Some say she was taken by that politician's men. Others say she went to Goa. I stopped asking. In this city, it's better not to know." Meera thanked him quietly and walked on. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy. She passed the temple where she and Rupa once sat, sharing street food and laughter between shifts. The temple bell rang faintly in the distance, a sound that felt both pure and cruel. She sat on the steps, watching children chase each other through puddles. Their laughter echoed the kind she once had, before the world taught her caution. She thought then of how every woman who entered that bar carried two lives, one for the stage, one for the soul. The stage demanded performance, the soul demanded peace. For years, Meera had believed she could balance both. But perhaps the truth was simpler. Perhaps the stage had kept her alive when the world offered no other choice. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer, not to the gods in the temple, but to the memory of every woman who had danced for survival, every voice that had been silenced, every name erased from history. When she opened her eyes, the city looked different, less cruel, more human. The past still hurt, but for the first time, it didn't define her. It was time to forgive herself. The monsoon returned to Mumbai, like a reminder of all the unfinished stories the city carried. The rain came down in sheets, washing the streets, softening the edges of the harsh world Meera had known. The days of neon lights and smoky bars were behind her now, but they lived on in her mind, not as shame, but as chapters of a life fully lived. 2 weeks had passed since her final performance. In that time, Meera had found herself restless. For the first time in decades, her nights were quiet. No rehearsals, no makeup, no footsteps echoing on stage floors. The stillness should have felt peaceful, but instead, it unnerved her. She had built her life on rhythm, and her body moved with purpose even in exhaustion. Now, with silence all around, she struggled to find that purpose again. Every morning, she still tied her hair in a bun and practiced for a few minutes in her small apartment. Slow spins, delicate wrist movements, steps drawn from the classical training she had once dreamed of pursuing before poverty forced her elsewhere. But something inside her was changing. For years, she had danced because she had to. Now, for the first time, she danced because she wanted to. One afternoon, as she walked past a slum on her way to the local market, she heard music, faint, playful, slightly offbeat. A group of children was gathered in a narrow alley, clapping and laughing as they tried to mimic dance moves from a song playing on an old radio. A little girl, maybe 9, was leading the group, shouting, "No, no, that's not how she turns. Watch the movie again." Meera stopped, smiling. The girl noticed her. "Auntie, you know this step?" she asked. Meera hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. Show us, Na." And just like that, she found herself surrounded by 6 children, their eager faces tilted up toward her. She showed them the move, a simple twirl with a flick of the wrist, and they clapped in delight. "Wah, Auntie, you're better than the heroine." For the first time in months, Meera laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that startled even her. Every day after that, the children waited for her. They'd gather in the same alley, barefoot, clothes damp from rain, faces bright with mischief. She began to teach them properly, rhythm, coordination, and how to balance and count the beat. It was nothing formal at first, just joy shared between a woman rediscovering her art and children discovering theirs. But word spread quickly. Within a month, more kids started coming. Some were beggars. Some were the children of street vendors or housemaids. Some had never been to school. The alley became their classroom, and Meera became their teacher. Her small gatherings caught the attention of a local NGO worker, Shalini, who happened to pass by one afternoon. She watched quietly as Meera instructed the children, correcting their posture, clapping her hands to the rhythm. When the session ended, Shalini approached her. "You teach beautifully," she said. "Were you a dancer?" Meera smiled faintly. "Still am." Shalini introduced herself and explained that she worked with an organization that supported arts education for underprivileged children. "Would you consider joining us? We can give you a space, an actual room with mirrors, mats, and everything." Meera hesitated. "I'm not a classical teacher. My kind of dance. It's not exactly respected." Shalini looked at her, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Dance is dance," she said softly. The body doesn't lie, no matter where it moves. That line stayed with Meera. The next week, she agreed to visit the NGO's small learning center, a renovated warehouse painted in bright colors, filled with art supplies and children's laughter. They gave her a corner room, 2 old speakers, and a wooden floor that creaked when she stepped on it. To Meera, it was a palace. The first day she taught formally, she felt nervous, something she hadn't felt on stage in years. 30 children sat in front of her, eyes wide, waiting. She took a deep breath. "All right," she said. "Before we begin, remember something. Dance is not about showing off, it's about feeling. You don't dance to impress, you dance to express." The class began clumsily, with giggles and missed beats, but by the end, something beautiful happened. The room filled with rhythm, imperfect, joyful, real. As the weeks passed, Meera saw changes in the children. The shy ones became confident, the restless ones learned focus, the angry ones learned release. Dance became a kind of therapy, not just for them, but for her too. At night, when she returned home, she would journal about each day, the progress of her students, their stories, their resilience. She realized that what she was doing went far beyond dance. She was teaching them to reclaim their bodies, their voices, their pride, the very things society had once tried to take from her. She thought often of Rupa, of how much she would have loved this. Maybe, in another world, Rupa too could have become a teacher, not a tragedy. Months passed, and Meera's classes grew. A local newspaper published an article titled, "Bar Dancer Turns Mentor, Teaches Hope Through Movement." At first, she felt exposed, the old shame stirring. But then she saw the children's reactions. They were proud of her. "Auntie, you're famous," they said, waving the newspaper. That day, Meera made a decision. She would no longer hide from her past. The next time a journalist came for an interview, she told her story openly, not as a confession, but as a lesson. She spoke about how society fails women like her, how art can be both survival and salvation, and how redemption isn't something given, it's something built. Her honesty struck a chord. The video interview went viral online. Comments flooded in, some cruel but many supportive. Young women from across the country wrote to her, saying she had inspired them to follow their passions despite stigma. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Pune who said, "I was also a dancer once. I left because I was ashamed. After seeing you, I feel like dancing again." Meera read that message 3 times before tears blurred her vision. Her dance center, once a small room, expanded. Donations came in from people moved by her story. She started a foundation named Angan Nritya, the Courtyard of Dance. It became a safe space for children, especially girls, to learn movement, discipline, and self-worth. Meera insisted that the classes be free for those who couldn't pay. She began incorporating lessons beyond dance, hygiene, communication, emotional awareness, and storytelling. Her classes became holistic, blending art with education. One afternoon, she watched a young girl named Tara perform a short solo she had choreographed herself, a piece about rain and hope. When Tara finished, the room applauded. "You have a gift," Meera said. Tara smiled shyly. "You taught me to believe in it." That moment crystallized something in Meera's heart. She realized that legacy isn't about fame or applause. It's about continuity, passing on what the world tried to take from you. But her past didn't disappear easily. One evening, a familiar face appeared at her center, a man who had once been a regular at the bar. He was older now, heavier, dressed in a suit. He smiled politely. "I read about you," he said. "Never thought I'd see the day. From bar dancer to teacher, quite a story." Meera tensed. "What do you want?" "Relax," he said, hands raised. "Just curious. People are saying you're some kind of social worker now. Funny, isn't it, considering where you came from?" She stared at him calmly. "Where I came from made me who I am." He smirked. "Maybe, but you should be careful. Not everyone likes your kind of publicity. Some of the old people don't want you bringing up that world again." She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then they should have thought about that before creating that world." He left soon after, but his words stayed with her. Meera knew she was challenging something larger than stigma. She was challenging memory itself. Society liked to forget the people it exploited. Her story was a mirror, and not everyone liked what they saw in it. But this time, she refused to be silent. One night, after her last class, she stood alone in the studio, lights dimmed, mirror reflecting her older face, lines etched where youth once glowed, but eyes brighter than ever. She tied her anklets once more and began to dance, slow, deliberate, full of gratitude. The same steps she had performed for applause now became a prayer of freedom. As she turned, she saw her reflection multiply in the mirror, and for a moment, it wasn't just her. It was Rupa, it was Parveen. It was every woman who had ever danced out of necessity and found art in survival. The music swelled, and Meera whispered to the rhythm, "For every broken dream, I'll build a new stage." Months passed, and Mumbai shifted again, new towers rising where old chawls crumbled, new names replacing old legends. But amid the noise of progress, the Angan Nritya Foundation continued to hum with life. Children still danced barefoot, still laughed, still dreamed. And in a quiet corner office, Meera sat by the window, sipping tea, her body slower now, but her eyes bright as ever. She had begun turning her handwritten journals into lessons, not just for dancers, but for anyone searching for meaning. Each page carried pieces of her story: discipline, dignity, resilience, forgiveness, and she titled the collection, "The Dance That Saved Me." One morning, she received a call from a cultural festival organizer. They were hosting a program celebrating women in the performing arts, especially those who had overcome social barriers. They wanted Meera to perform one final piece. At first, she hesitated. Her knees ached. Her stamina wasn't what it once was. But something inside her said yes, because this time she wouldn't be dancing for survival, she'd be dancing for truth. The evening of the performance arrived. The auditorium was packed. Artists, journalists, NGO workers, students, and even some of Meera's old acquaintances from the bar days. Her students filled the front rows, eyes wide with pride. The lights dimmed. The air shimmered with quiet anticipation. When Meera stepped onto the stage, the audience gasped softly. She wore a simple cotton sari, not the glittering costume of her bar days. No feathers, no sequins, only grace. Her silver hair was tied in a bun, a red bindi centered perfectly on her forehead. A single spotlight followed her as she began to move. The performance was called Unbroken. It was a piece she had choreographed herself, part classical, part contemporary, and deeply autobiographical. It began with slow, hesitant steps. A girl lost in the noise of the city, her hands trembling, her body unsure. Then came the rhythm of survival, faster beats, sharper turns, each movement echoing the years she spent performing under flashing neon lights, her face painted with forced smiles. Halfway through, the music softened. She paused, breath heavy, eyes closed. Then the tempo changed again, flowing, open, liberated. Her hands lifted toward the sky. Her feet moved like waves. It was not a dance of pain anymore. It was a dance of release. By the time the music ended, the hall was silent. And then, the applause came, not the loud, drunken claps of bar audiences, but something deeper, reverent. Children ran up to the stage, throwing marigold petals at her feet. Meera smiled, tears streaming freely. A young journalist came up afterward. "Ma'am, that was extraordinary. What would you like the world to take from your story?" Meera took a moment before answering. Her voice was steady. "People think dancers like me live only for the applause. But what we really live for is the chance to be seen, not as entertainment, but as human." She paused. "I was never ashamed of dancing. I was ashamed of being made to feel less, because of where I danced. The stage doesn't define the dancer, the heart does, and when you dance with purpose, even your scars move with grace. After the festival, her foundation received more support than ever. Other former dancers reached out, asking how they could help teach, mentor, or simply be part of something that restored dignity. Meera welcomed them all. Together, they expanded the foundation's work, adding art therapy, literacy classes, and skill workshops for women seeking second chances. A movement began quietly, born not from anger but from art. A year later, Meera's students held their first independent recital. It was a small event in a local school auditorium, but for her, it felt larger than any stage she'd ever performed on. She watched from the back as her students danced with confidence, joy, and freedom. When the show ended, they invited her on stage to say a few words. Meera walked slowly to the microphone. The crowd stood in silence. She smiled. "When I was young, I believed dance was my only escape. I was wrong. Dance was my way home." That night, after the celebration, she returned to her apartment. It was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock. She took out her anklets, the same ones she had worn for her last bar performance, and placed them on her dressing table. Next to them lay a photograph, her students from the foundation, smiling in bright costumes. She touched the photo gently. "I finally did it, Rupa," she whispered. "We made something good out of all that pain." Then she opened her window. The city stretched before her, vast, restless, alive. In the distance, she could hear faint music, maybe from a wedding, maybe from another dancer beginning her own story. And Meera smiled, because she knew now that stories like hers didn't end, they transformed. Months later, when Meera passed away quietly in her sleep, the news spread like a soft ripple through the city. Her funeral was simple, attended by students, teachers, and even strangers who had been touched by her words. But her legacy didn't fade. The Anga Nritya Foundation continued under her students' leadership, expanding to new cities. They added a scholarship in her name, the Meera Grant for Artistic Resilience, awarded annually to young dancers from marginalized backgrounds. And every year, on her birthday, her students gathered to perform Unbroken, the same dance she had once performed on her final night. They danced not to mourn her but to celebrate her. Years later, a young girl, barefoot, nervous, hopeful, entered the foundation's dance hall for the first time. On the wall was a mural of Meera, her hands raised mid-dance, eyes alight with strength. The girl asked her teacher, "Who is she?" The teacher smiled. "She was the one who taught us that every movement has meaning. Even pain can become poetry if you dare to face it." The girl nodded slowly, as if understanding something beyond her age. And when the music began, she moved, hesitant at first, then freer, lighter, stronger. Somewhere, in that rhythm, Meera lived on,